Pippin! Sorry, that was a huge yawn. I'm very tired. I'm pretty cranky. I'm having a bad brain day. Just popped a Xanax, but I'm gonna push through. So meanwhile, I'm having a great hair day. How did I do this? I don't know. Let's talk about all the books I read in September. This is going to be a full wrap up, but hopefully I can keep it pretty short because, as I previously stated, I'm hungry, I'm tired, I'm cranky. But I did want to mention that I finished 27, well, I didn't finish them all. I read / started 27 books. So that's what we'll be talking about. It's under 30. I'm just going to talk about all of them and we'll go from there. Real quick, I did DNF 2 books. The first was an arc. That's always bad when that happens, but I couldn't help it. I was just like, there's so many better books I could be reading right now. This is perfectly fine, but that's it. And that's the book swap. And this book was, I don't even remember what it was about. I got like a third of the way through. It's set in England. I think they swapped book recommendations, but I didn't even get to that part yet. I didn't care for the 2 main characters. I don't know. I DNF'd it. Moving on. The second one was a DNF for now. I tried to read A Changed Man, which is a book that I put on my TBR after I did one of my try a chapter and unhaul videos I think this was like in April. And I got that on my TBR, and I got another one from that same video on this month, and I didn't end up reading that one. So you can tell my brain's been not in a great spot because I couldn't read the literary fictions. And instead I read some horrors and some fantasy. And then, yeah, for now, I've read the first chapter twice now. I did have a 1-star also. So we're starting at the bottom before I get to these. Overall, I did have an aggressively okay month of reading. Nothing, well, 2 things I read were not great, but everything else was fine, if not really good, but I didn't have any 5 stars. The first thing was a book that it's a 1-star, but it's technically a 1.5 star. But 1 star is fine too, because I just really did not like this book, and it's called Fiasco, and it is a book, first of all, it's out of date. It was published 20 years ago, and the author was older at the time, but I think that wouldn't have mattered if he was good at writing the book, but he also wasn't good at writing the book, and it was amazing how boring he made writing about Hollywood scandal. Also, the movies he picked weren't necessarily ones that I wanted to read about. But how do you make a book about, a chapter about Battlefield Earth boring? He did it. Also, the chapter on Cleopatra, my counter oven, what's it called? Oh my God, I can't remember words. It's done preheating. The chapter on Cleopatra made me mad because he clearly, and he does this throughout the book, he's kind of a misogynist pig. Like, he just minimizes everything that happened with Elizabeth Taylor as her being flighty and selfish and a drug addict. And I'm like, I just read her biography that was written by a woman and somebody who's much better writer than you. And I really don't think this is the way it went down, but whatever. I do not recommend this book. If you want to read about Hollywood scandal, just Google it. Just Google famous Hollywood flops, and you can, film blogs all over the place will have written about it. In fact, the chapter about Ishtar sucked, but I went and I Googled Ishtar and I had a grand old time. 1 star. Now, I did also have a 2-star, so let's move on. It's a book that I got from Aardvark, but it was also a book club book for one of my in real life book clubs that I didn't end up going to. Oops. And that's The Fiction Writer by Gillian Cantor. I'd never read anything by this author before, and I probably won't read anything from her again, judging by how this went. It just wasn't very good. So this is a book about a writer. Her first novel was a book about, it was a retelling of Rebecca in the modern era called Becky. Super clever. And she gets hired to be a ghostwriter for this billionaire in Malibu. That's his house. And when she gets there, he tells her that Daphne du Maurier stole his grandmother's life story. And he basically wants her to write about it. But it was like, the plot was so weird. And I hated the characters. Like, they weren't even fun to read about. The twists were so predictable. I did not like what this did with Rebecca, which is a really good book. Just the stuff that it was trying to say about misogyny and abusive relationships and gaslighting and plagiarism just were so basic. It was just, this is not worth your time. I really don't recommend this at all. 2 stars. Okay, now we're going to 3 stars, which sadly is a thriller, and that's Kill for Me, Kill for You. So the first third of this book was very much what I wanted. So this is a play on Strangers on the Train. In fact, Strangers on the Train is name dropped in here a couple of times, where 2 women meet in a grief support group. The main person that we're introduced to first is a woman named, is it Ruth? No, Ruth, somebody else. Wendy. Amanda. Her daughter was kidnapped and murdered, and her husband killed himself afterwards, and she knows who did it, and he got off. They couldn't convict him because his father is a billionaire, and so she has been stalking him for the last 6 months. And the book opens on a chapter when she's trying to murder him, like straight up trying to murder him, and the attempt fails, not because she wasn't wanting to do it, but because of circumstances. And then she meets this woman called Wendy in her grief support group, and Wendy's daughter was murdered by her high school teacher, and they become overnight besties and decide that they can get rid of these awful men themselves. Okay, so the first third of this is like them sort of planning, them getting to know each other. It was sort of slower paced. There were other POVs thrown in from the detective on the case and from this woman named Ruth who experiences a horrific break-in in her house and she's stabbed. But at about the 1/3 mark, this turned into just your standard shock-a-minute thriller with no substance. And it's just not for me. I don't want empty twists. And that's what this felt like. Yeah, 3 stars. It's fine. Not for me. Okay, now I have some 3.5-star books. The first of which is an audiobook, Displeasure Island. This is the 2nd book in a series. The first was Grave Expectations. I love Grave Expectations. I gave it a 4.5 last year. This book was fine. I gave it a 3.5. I don't think that it had enough of what I really loved about the first book in the series. So this is a series that is about a millennial who isn't doing so hot. She's working as a psychic and a medium, because as it turns out, she can see ghosts after her best friend Sophie was murdered at 17, and Sophie has been haunting her ever since, and they have like a troubled relationship because Sophie is constantly there, like not letting Claire grow up, and Sophie is resentful because Claire gets to do all these things that she doesn't get to do. And I wanted more of their relationship, and also the mystery just wasn't as interesting or fun to me as the first book. So, but it was still fun, and I will still continue in the series. Next up is, where'd it go? Oh, I think I already returned it to the library. Oops. And that's Lenny Marks Gets Away with Murder. I was really excited about this book, and I had it pre-ordered originally. Luckily, I canceled my pre-order when I was trying to save money and get things from the library, because it was just fine. But honestly, I'm not going to say too much about it. If you have already read Eleanor Oliphant is Completely Fine, you 1000% do not need to read Lenny Marks Gets Away with Murder. So there's surface level differences, but overall it's the same general plot, the same themes. I mean, really. And then Eleanor Oliphant is a much better book. So that's my opinion, but I still gave it 3.5 stars because it was fine. Next up we have, I reread Red Rising for the first time since it was published, and in preparation for rereading books 2 and 3, and then finally getting to the last, the second part of the series, which I had never read. And honestly, it's really good that I reread because I didn't remember much. But also, rereading has prompted me to sort of reevaluate my rating. When I first rated the book, I rated it a 4 stars because the second half of the book is much, much stronger than the first half, and you end on a high note. So it like heavily skews your feelings, at least for me, and I feel like there's a lot of people who feel similarly. I really noticed it this time, especially since I was doing it on audio, which takes less time, that the first half is just weak. in general. She's really cheesy and overdone and first writery. And I really do not like Eo, Darrow's wife, who dies at the beginning of the book. I really don't like her. I just think it's such a cheesy, dumb plot move she essentially fridges herself for Darrow's growth. And I'm like, really? Really? But this is by far the weakest part of the series, and I think that it's only going to go up from here. And I remember loving book 2. So hopefully I'll get to that soon. And then my last 3.5-star book is Bellwether Rhapsody by Kate Reculia. I have had this on my TBR since it was published. I should have read it back then because I would have liked it a lot more. Maybe I just wasn't in the mood for this type of book, and maybe I'm just wanting other things right now. But this is a book. It is, I would say, general fiction with elements of mystery. A book about a hotel called the Bellwether that is hosting a statewide music festival competition where the kids try out, for either the chorus or the orchestra, and then they get to play with famous musicians and like do an exhibition, and it looks good on your transcript. And while they're there, one of the kids goes missing. And then also involved in this, there is a character who 15 years before was a 10 or 11-year-old bridesmaid in her sister's wedding. And then the night of her sister's wedding, she goes up, to leave the reception or whatever in her bridesmaid's outfit. And she happens upon a fight between another bride and groom who also got married that same day at the hotel. And the bride has shot her husband with a shotgun and then hung herself. And so she's extremely traumatized. So we learn about how that affects her. And then there's also little characters throughout, and there is like a truly heinous sociopath of a person in this book. But I think what was throwing me and keeping me from really like loving the book is that it didn't just follow the twin music prodigies. It didn't just follow this girl who was traumatized 15 years before. It didn't just follow the manager of the hotel. It didn't just follow the music festival lady. It didn't just follow the conductor of the orchestra. It followed all of them. And it's such a short book that I'd never fully emotionally bonded with any of them. But it was a really good time. If you like this sort of story, I recommend. Now we have 4 stars. The majority of the books I read this month were 4 stars. So let's start with I Have Some Questions for You by Rebecca McKay. This book was perfectly fine. It wasn't my favorite book I've ever read. I will probably be unhauling it. Sorry in advance. I was keeping it by my window to the person who gets this, but it's fine. It's totally readable. It's in good condition otherwise. Honestly, like at this point, I do not even remember what this book was about. Hold on one second. It's a podcast, blah, blah, blah. Oh yeah. It's about a lady she runs a podcast, and she's teaching a 2-week course for students at her alma mater that she went to, a boarding school that she went to when she was in high school. And she's teaching them how to make a podcast. And one of them decides to make a podcast about a murder at the school. And it just so happens that murder was Bodhi's roommate, and Bodhi was there when it happened. Not when the murder happened, like in the room, but at the school. This girl's investigation causes Bodhi to rethink things that happened. And I mean, it was fine. This was also sort of a Me Too novel, but I feel like it was a little too scattered thematically for me. I didn't really get it didn't like fully click what the author was going for, but I was entertained, and like individual moments were nice and I liked them, but it never cohered as a fully whole story, even though the author is clearly talented at a sentence level, if that makes sense. I don't know. Other people have really liked this. I think that it just wasn't the perfect book for me. So next up is Dreadful by Caitlin Rozakis. This is it's like a satirical comedic fantasy book, but I would also say it's pretty cozy. So the book opens with this man who is middle-aged, or it seems like he's middle-aged, and he wakes up and he has no idea who he is or where he is. And it turns out he finds out throughout the course of the first chapter of the book that he is actually an evil dark wizard named Lord Gavrax, and he has to find a way to deal with Gavrax's plans that are already he's kidnapped himself a princess. He doesn't know what to do with her. other dark wizards have a plot with him. He has no idea what's going on. He's got all these minions, the little goblins that live in the castle. And he has to, it was interesting because it's very clearly one of the themes of this book, that memories make you who you are. And if you don't remember your life, then you're not you anymore. So he essentially feels like a completely different person, and he looks at his former self as a different person and realizes he's not that person anymore. So it was interesting, and it was funny, and it was just an overall good time. I gave it 4 stars. I can see it not being super memorable though in the future, because it wasn't like laugh out loud funny. It was just like funny, good time, haha, cozy kind of thing. So I don't know how I'll feel about it in the future, but as for right now, it's 4 stars. Then we have the long-awaited sequel to Jasper Ford's, what's it called? Shades of Grey. And it is a very silly dystopia where people they organize their society by what colors you can see. Different colors have different hierarchies and all this stuff. So this is book 2. It's 16 years in the making, I believe. 15, 14, I don't remember. A long time. And I had a good time with this. It would make an excellent finale to the series if he only makes it a duology, but I think he is actually working on a 3rd book. But it ended in a place that I was really surprised at, and it was really engaging. I would recommend, if you've read Shades of Grey, to reread, because it goes straight into it and it references things that happened in that first book. And I would have been totally lost if I hadn't reread. I don't have much to say about this other than I'm glad I finally got to read it, but it was sort of a letdown. Like, I don't know if it was worth the wait. You know what I mean? Like, it was just fine. So 4 stars. Oh, let's do my digitals. First up for digitals is a novella. It's next in the chronological reading order of the Vorkosigan Saga, which is a space opera that Lois McMaster Bujold started in the 80s. And this comes next. I needed to read this to be able to read The Vor Game, which is a book I'll talk about in just a second. But this is a novella about Miles fresh out of graduating from the academy. Oh, Lily's gonna barf. Fresh out of graduating from the academy, he is called upon in his hometown to, because it's like a feudal system on a planet. Like, it's really hard to explain what's going on. But basically, he has a duty to... Gross, dude! Basically, he has a duty to speak justice for the people living in his region, whatever, because they're like feudal lords. The planet that he lives on is kind of backwater because they were isolated for so long, so the rest of the universe is a lot more advanced technologically and socially than Barrayar, which is the planet they live on. So anyway, one of the main conflicts of the series is that Barrayar has this like terrible fear of genetic mutation. They call people who have anything physically wrong with them, regardless of whether it's genetic. There was a huge tradition to kill them at birth or before birth, but that has slowly begun to change. And Miles, the main character, has major disability because his mother, when she was pregnant with him, she was attacked with a poison gas that affected his development. And so it's a huge conflict throughout the series that this kid is so smart and so competent, but he's also disabled and looked down upon by his society. So he's called to judge the infanticide, so it's very sad, of a baby girl who had a cleft palate and a hair lip. Or was it just a hair lip? I can't remember if it was both or not. Even in Barrayar now, that's treatable, but these people live really remotely. And so somebody has killed this woman's baby. She comes to the Vorkosigans and asks them for justice. She thinks it was her husband. And so he goes up there to try to figure out who it was. And it was really good. I rarely like novellas a lot, but this was really emotionally affecting. And I gave it 4 stars. Okay, next up is a book that I read on a whim because it came up in my library hold. So I must have put a hold on it months ago for some reason. And that is Sure, I'll Join Your Cult by Maria Bamford. This is a comedic memoir about her journey over her lifetime with mental illness. It is not a book about cults. She frames the book because of her mental illness. She has always felt a fierce need to belong, and that she's looked for groups and places to belong in order to give herself meaning and try to cope with her mental illness. So it is not a book about cults. So just don't go into that expecting interesting. What it is really is her, a lot of 12-step groups is a lot of it. I really liked this book. It's very funny. I highly recommend the audiobook. Obviously, she's not going to be for everyone, but her deadpan, not deadpan, she's not deadpan. That's the word I'm looking. Self-deprecating sense of humor was very funny to me. And I just like her attitude, even as she's talking about really heavy subjects, she has frequently had suicidal thoughts, and her husband is also very depressed, and they cope together, and sometimes they don't, and all the while she's making jokes about this heavy thing, because what else is she gonna do? Anyway, I liked it so much I googled her, and I immediately saw that she was coming to Tucson, my town, next March, and I badgered my friends to come with me. So I now have tickets to see Maria Bamford in March of next year, and I'm gonna leave this review there, and that should speak for itself. Next up, we have An Echo of Things to Come, which is the second book in the Miscellaneous trilogy by James Islington. Okay, I have since heard people say Islington. Is it Islington or is it Islington? The audiobook says Islington, but I don't trust audiobooks necessarily. So what is it? This is the second book in the series. It was more of the same, 4-star epic fantasy. Really good audiobook. I like the story, but my main criticism of the book is that it's not a book that you can fully love the first time you read it because of the way that he's structured it. I said this in a Goodreads status update, but the experience of reading this book, normally when you read a fantasy book, say it's like a jigsaw puzzle, and you're watching somebody else who's invisible put this puzzle together, and they have a plan and they know what they're doing and they know what the whole puzzle looks like, but you don't yet. So the author in this case is the invisible hand. Okay, most books will start with a recognizable picture and then build that out and then put pieces, with other pieces that match, and then gradually you see the picture come together, right? And it makes more sense because you see, little pieces that make sense and then they form a whole, okay? Reading this book is like watching that invisible hand just place jigsaw pieces randomly on the table, knowing exactly where they go, but you as the person watching this phenomenon have no freaking clue what's going on. You cannot see the picture until almost the very last minute because of the way it's being put together. That is my experience of reading this series. Individual moments are good. I like the characters, but the mythology is so intense and obscured by the format. So I feel like he was being really ambitious for his first novel, and also again there's a lot of similarities to mostly Wheel of Time in the second one, because there's if you've read Wheel of Time, The Forsaken, there's an equivalent to The Forsaken, except for I actually think that Islington pulls it off better than Jordan did. I never liked reading about The Forsaken in Wheel of Time, but I like reading about the analog in this series. Anyway, 4 stars. We'll probably get to the third book in November or December. Next up, this was an ARC. I read it by ebook, and that's Fang Fiction by Kate Stayman London. I read her debut romance back in 2020, 21, I can't remember. It was back when my book club had to meet virtually because of the pandemic. And I liked that book. It was not my favorite romance I've ever read, but definitely liked it enough to check out the author's future books. And when I saw that this book was going to be a paranormal romance metafiction book, I jumped on it. Sad to say, it didn't quite live up to my expectations, and it's also unfortunate that I just recently read Long Live Evil by Sarah Reese Brennan, which has a very similar premise of a woman essentially being able to go into the book series that she loves so much. In that case, she literally is dropped into the narrative. But in Fang Fiction, the main character finds out that the books are based on something that exists in real life, and she gets to go there. And it's got vampires and a queer romance and a straight romance and metafictional asides like podcast transcripts and newspaper articles and all this stuff throughout, with the author trying to build out this fictional book series and make you feel like it's a real book series, but I just don't think she really succeeded. I also didn't care about the love interest at all. I was rooting much more for the queer subplot romance instead. But the big thing in this for me, and I wish the book had focused on that instead of the romance, was the friendship between the main character and her college roommate, who have a falling out because something really traumatic happens to the main character, and she never tells her, and just they stop being close. This was an interesting experiment, but again, it didn't fully work for me. In retrospect, I think I actually should have given it 3.5 stars, but I think I was like tired when I like rated it or something. I don't know. 3.5, 4-ish. So that's fan fiction. Last digital one for the 4 stars is a book that I highly recommend. It is called Q, A Voyage Around the Queen. And it is, I guess, what the author is calling a kaleidoscopic biography of Queen Elizabeth II. So a normal biography uses primary sources from both people close to a person and from the person themselves, letters, diaries, court records, that kind of thing, to trace the person's life. What Craig Brown does is he doesn't pull any primary sources from the Queen herself. He instead pulls primary sources from the general public, celebrities at the time, people who were only tangentially close to her, like who took drawing lessons with her as a child or who wanted to be her lady in waiting, people who attended the coronation. Like he pulls it from everywhere, like little pieces here and there and everywhere he can. And what ends up happening is, even though we never see the Queen from her own point of view and it's not linear, we get a kaleidoscopic view of the Queen and who she was. And he doesn't ever analyze the pieces, he just presents them, and then you form the picture in your head. And that's really cool, the way that he did that. But also the book itself was funny. It was interesting the whole way through. It was a long frickin' book. It was 24 hours of audio. I think it's like 670 something pages in the American version and like 800 something in the UK. I mean, as long as you're not trying to cram it, it flies by because it's so entertaining. He makes it so that, like, what do the common people think of her? What have people written about her in magazines? What did people write about her in their diaries? And he structures it thematically. Like, there's a chapter about the coronation. There's a chapter about her corgis and all that stuff. There's a chapter about Princess Diana. There's a chapter about, it's organized and it's not linear, like I said. Highly recommend that. I did give it 4 stars. I might actually consider bumping it up. I do want to buy it. This cover is gorgeous, and I think it would be a really cool thing to own and have on my shelves. So yeah, highly recommend that one, even if you're not a biography person, because I'm not. And even if you're not interested in the royals, because I'm not. It was just like a good book about feeling like you were put in a time and place across this woman's enormous lifespan. Really good time. And I think that's it for my digitals, at least for the 4 stars. So let's talk about the rest of the 4 stars physically. Real quick, this is a book that I picked up for the Read Harder Challenge. It is called The Art of Drag. It is an informative cultural history, essentially, illustrated. The illustrations are so gorgeous. It goes into not just Western stuff too, but it goes into like ancient Greece and Shakespearean theater, talks about the history of all this stuff in the drag, kabuki theater, opera. I mean, this is a real throwback. Mary Martin playing Peter Pan. So like it ties all of these like gender bending drag moments in culture, and the art is so fun. It's so colorful and it's very entertaining and historically relevant. Like, this is a little article about the Cooper's Donuts riot, which is the first, even it predated Stonewall. And it's got like influential people in queer history, Divine and John Waters, and David Bowie, and the Rocky Horror Picture Show. So yeah, and then like it's just really cool. Of course, RuPaul's in here. So yeah, I really had a good time with this. If I ever found it on sale somewhere, I would totally buy it and keep it because it's really cool. And then we've got The Bone Season by Samantha Shannon. This is the 10th anniversary revised edition. I have an entire reading vlog up for this that I will link down below, so I'm going to not go into this too much. But overall, this revised version of the book, I previously read the first version, gave it 2 stars, didn't like it, never thought I would read from her again. But when she rewrote it, I said, hey, she's grown as a writer. I want to give it a shot, and I liked it. So I will be moving on in the series. It is an dystopian, science fiction, urban, paranormal, fantasy, romance thing that is pretty complex that I think this version does the story actual justice. So 4 stars. All right, then we have The Bandit Queens by Perini Schroff. This one, I think I liked it more than 4 stars. I might up my rating in the future. It's sat in my mind. This is the first book stupid hair. This is the first book I read in September, and it's really aged pleasantly in there. And this is a book about, what's her name? A woman in India, small town in India, named Geeta, and her husband disappeared one day. Everyone around her assumed, because she was abused by him and everyone knew it, that she killed him and that she's a murderer and a witch. So this has been going on for years and years, and one day this woman comes to her and asks for help, like, hey, since you're a murderer, since you've already done this, can you help me? And it starts this whole chain of events where it's like simultaneously serious, about serious topics, but also like funny and like black humor. And then it has like a heartwarming ending despite all the negativity and the black humor. And I really liked the style, and I highly recommend this one. Actually, I think that I might want to change my rating to a 4.5. It's not quite a 5 for me, but I will definitely reread in the future. And then I read Queen Bee by Juno Dawson. This is a prequel novella to Her Majesty's Royal Coven series. It follows Anne Boleyn and her coven, and she's the original founder of Her Majesty's Royal Coven, although Queen Victoria is really the one that like solidified it as a government entity. My main criticism with this book, it is a novella, it's 161 pages, this version. It should have been a full novel. It shouldn't have been a novella. I wanted more from all of these characters. I feel like this could have been a 5-star book if it would have been 100 pages longer. There wasn't enough time. What was there was great, but I needed more. That is my main criticism, and there's not much I can do about it. It exists. This is its length, and I liked it, but it could have been better. And my last 4-star book, this is the book I read instead of reading one of the literary fictions that I did not read, that I was supposed to read, and that's Into the Drowning Deep by Mira Grant. And this is a book about what if mermaids were real, and instead of being beautiful, they're really scary as shit. It's a book about, like, the book opens with a ship being lost. Like, essentially, it's like the Sci-Fi Channel. They commissioned these fake documentaries of cryptids and send people out to do, like, scientific research on them, but it's all staged. But it turns out they actually found mermaids, and the ship never came back and everyone died. And then 15 years later, or 10 years later, I think it's 10, one of the people who was on the ship, her sister is a scientist, and she has been obsessed with finding out what happened to her sister and proving that mermaids were real, because there was footage leaked by the government and people fight about whether or not it was faked or not. This was a long book. It could have been a little bit shorter. I think some of it could have been cut, but maybe that's just me not liking all the gore scenes. But things go unexpected places. They send out an entirely new research vessel to find out what happened to the old one, which is always a great idea. They're like, oh, we know what's coming now. No, you don't. And it was really, really creepy. So if you are interested in mermaid horror, this is probably a good book for you. Now, on to our 4.5 stars. Let's start with my digital. And that is, well, the Vor Game. Let's do the Vor Game first. So this is book 6, book 5 in the chronological order of the Vorkosigan saga. Following Miles, it takes place about a month after the novella that I talked about earlier. And Miles is on his first official posting as a new graduate, and nobody knows what to do with him exactly. because he has a very strong personality and he doesn't necessarily follow very well. He's a natural leader and they want him to learn how to follow and respect his authority, but he's not very good at that. And they put him in this place where he immediately gets himself into trouble, and that knocks over other dominoes, and then it leads him into like basically preventing a war and rescuing an emperor. And it was just a really good time. I enjoyed myself. Not quite a 5-star. I still haven't given anything in this series 5 stars yet, but I'm hoping that it will come soon. My last digital read is The Gate of the Feral Gods by Matt Dinneman. This is book 4 in the Dungeon Crawler Carl series, and this is the longest book yet. I didn't quite like it as much as book 3, but I'm still having a blast with this series. I'm not going to go too much into what's actually happening in the plot because you've got to start at book 1, but Carl and the remainders of humanity are still in this underground dungeon that the aliens made for them, playing their game and trying to stay alive. And it's just very satirical. And this one got a lot darker also. And there's clues to where the series is going in terms of main character Carl's arc. Donut, as always, was a delight. I could have used more Donut, actually. Same thing I've said about the rest of the series, I say for this book. It was great. And then my last 4 I missed a 4-star. 4 stars goes to Richard Osman's new book, We Solve Murders. This is a book that, now that I know what it's about, I should have known going in I wouldn't give it 5 stars, because fast-paced thriller, adventure, espionage, hitman stories that are like global just don't hit me in that sweet 5-star spot like Thursday Murder Club does. But this was still really funny. So this is about Amy, who is what they call it, close protection. She's a bodyguard, and she's really freaking good at her job, and she works for a really elite organization, and she's protecting this author who is a fake author, but she's really famous in this world. And she learns that somebody is not only trying to kill her, but framing her for the murders of these mid-influencers, one of whom gets eaten by a shark, and money is found at all of the crime scenes. And so they're trying to figure out what's going on, and she and this author, whose name is Rosie, get involved in this. And meanwhile, Amy is really close with her father-in-law, whose name is Steve. He's widowed. He lives in a small village in England. He used to be a detective in the police force, and he's retired now, and now he runs a private investigation business that takes care of very low stakes problems like finding dogs. Like, there's a really funny moment in the beginning of the book where he's like, Steve knows how dogs think, so he will find this dog. He knows it, and sure enough, he does find the dog. But anyway, the name of his business is Steve Investigates, which is great. But Amy really trusts him, and he's got a good head on his shoulders. So she asks him to help her. So he gets involved in this, solving these murders and trying to clear her name, and everything gets kind of hectic, but it stays funny, and the plot was clear. I don't know. I had a really good time with this. It just wasn't a perfect 5 for me. Now my last 4.5-star book. This was almost a 5, but in the very ending, I just couldn't do it. It just didn't hit right. Maybe on reread it will, like when I know what's coming. But that is Revival by Stephen King. So this is a book I feel like not many people read or talk about because the description doesn't sound like super sexy or weird or catching. But basically what this is about is this boy, Jamie, talks about this relationship that he's had with this preacher that started when he was 6 years old and ends, through the end of his life. He calls this preacher his 5th business, which is like, there's main characters in your life, there's bit players, there's people you barely see, and then there's the person who comes in at very important points in your life and changes your life over and over again. And that is this man, Reverend Jacobs, for Jamie. And Reverend Jacobs is a preacher, very into Jesus, very like Baptist. Are they Baptists? Are they Methodists? I can't remember. I mean, he's very intense about his faith, but he's also obsessed with electricity, and he's very smart. Like, he could have been an electrical engineer, kind of smart, and he would have been a genius at it, but instead he's a preacher. And so the book follows, like, we hit Jamie at different points in his life when he interacts with this guy, and as they both get older, it becomes clear that this guy is into some things, and it affects Jamie, and Jamie then feels obligated to figure out what's really going on because he's involved and he's the only person maybe who can stop this guy from letting his obsession hurt other people. See, this doesn't sound like very sexy, but I promise you it was extremely riveting. Like some of the best character work I've ever seen Stephen King do. Again, he writes about addiction, which is something he's really good at because he has firsthand experience. The way, I don't know, just the way this is written, and I just feel like I know these characters. The ending, it makes sense. I can see where the clues were laid, but I really wasn't expecting it, so I think I would just need to reread. But anyway, it's 4.5 stars. Highly recommend. And then we come to my final book, and it is 5-star, but it is only a reread, so I'm not counting it. Like, I didn't have any new 5 stars. And I read the first Murderbot novella again, All Systems Red. This is the Subterranean Press bind up version. I mean, just as good as it was the first time I read it. If you haven't read Murderbot yet, what are you doing with your life? Murderbot Murderbot would approve of you just going about your business and not paying attention to Murderbot. I mean, you got to read it to experience. I don't want to talk about it. 5 stars. And that, my friends, was September. I'm gonna go drink some tequila. Just kidding, I'm not. I'm gonna go eat hash browns and eggs and edit this video. If you have made it to the end of this video, please don't forget to leave me a like and subscribe if you want to. It really helps me get noticed by the algorithm. And then if you don't have anything to say about any of these books, please leave me a lightning bolt for revival or a circus tent, either one. And I will see you in the next one very soon. Actually, I'm going to be posting in pretty rapid succession my first weekly wrap-up of spooky season. I'm doing weekly wrap-ups instead of monthly because I'm going to be reading a lot of books. And also my October unboxing should be happening sometime within the next 4 to 5 days. So I don't know when I'm going to post which video, but both of those are coming very soon. Ending videos, whatever. Okay, love you, bye.